Ph.D. Her website is posted here, and then her Twitter handle as well for anybody who wants to live tweet or follow her if you don't all do so already. Again, the link for the Q&A doc is here, and the link to volunteer to lead one of the chapters for the Tidy Models Book Club. I will hand it over to Silvia. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so as Jesse said, my name is Silvia, and I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and get started. Okay, let's see. Tab. Okay. Let me jump into full screen mode for now. Okay, so welcome to this workshop. So a little bit about me is I work as a data analyst at the University of Pennsylvania in a lab called the Penn Urban Health Lab. And the projects that I work on are at the intersection of racial justice, urban greening, and health equity. So I'm very excited. I just started this job about a month ago, and I'm learning a lot of new things, including spatial things. So putting this map together was practice for me, preparing for the new role. And I've been learning a lot just about different ways to make maps, and there's a lot to learn. And so I'm here just to share my process of putting together this Center City SIPS map. And I welcome anybody to share resources or tips in the chat box so we can all learn together. Okay, so again, welcome to the workshop. Thanks so much for being here and taking time out of your day to learn about map making. And I'm going to cover web scraping, geocoding, and map making. And it's this like self-contained project that required these three things. And so I'll talk through how I went from start to finish. And I want to give a big thanks to Our Lady's Philly for inviting me to give this workshop. And as I said earlier, there's a link going around with all the other links that you need for today. You can either work locally on your machine if you want to clone the GitHub repo, but there's also an RStudio cloud project up and running that has the information, the materials in there. And this content is adapted from a blog post that I wrote a few months ago at the beginning of this Center City SIPS timeframe. And just a little bit of information about navigating the slides. So there's a table of contents for the slides that you can access by clicking or accessing the hamburger menu icon on the bottom left corner of the screen. And there are also some slides in this deck that have interactive tabs that we will click on or enter as we go. And slides are made using Quarto. And yeah, I'll just leave it there. We can move on. Okay. So the motivation for this project that I took on, just a personal project, was there's this event held in Philadelphia. Actually, I'm not sure how many summers this has been running, but this was the first year after lockdown that they started up this event again. And so it's basically just, there's a bunch of different restaurants and bars and retailers that participate in this event where they all provide some kind of special, like happy hour special on Wednesday evenings, you know, between, I think it was like 4 and 6 p.m. or something like that. And so they have a nice website dedicated to this event that you can go to, and you can browse all the different restaurants and bars that are offering specials, but they don't provide a map view, which makes it really hard, at least for me, to locate some kind of happy hour special nearby, because just getting the address, even though I might know roughly where it is, it doesn't provide me with enough information to know what's close by, etc. So our approach today is going to be tackling this problem, and we're going to use our tools to build an interactive map with all the information provided on the website. So it'll involve scraping the data from the site, and we'll use the RVES package to do that. It'll involve geocoding the addresses for each of the restaurants and bars, and we'll be using Tidy Geocoder for that. And then the last step will be building the map and customizing it, and we'll be relying on Leaflet and an extension package for that piece. the different packages that are used in these slides, but also just in the RStudio Cloud project or in the GitHub repo are listed on this slide. So you'll use a tidyverse for a lot of different data manipulation functions. We'll use the here package, knit-r package, robots, txt, rvest, tidy geocoder, leaflet, and then leaflet extras in our process here. And actually, while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and just screen share or switch over to the RStudio Cloud tab and just orient you a little bit as to what's going on in there. The first thing you might notice is that I put in a dark theme for the IDE in RStudio Cloud. You don't have to keep it. I use that because I thought it would be better for my eyes if it starts to get dark. But if you want to change it, you can navigate to Tools, and I think it's Global Options. And you can go to Appearance and then change the theme. Okay, and in terms of what's in this project, there's a data folder and there's an index.qmd file. The QMD extension means that it's a Quarto file. And if you're not familiar with Quarto, it's, there's a lot to know about it, but it's sort of the latest and greatest scientific publishing system that you can use really seamlessly with different languages. And there's just a lot of functionality. And there'll be some functionality that you'll be able to notice when as you browse this document. But for now, if you want to, I'll do it on my end, but you can go ahead and render the document much like you would render an R Markdown file, and it'll produce an HTML document that has an HTML version of the process we'll go through today. Okay, maybe I'll leave that alone for now. And we can look at this web page that I was mentioning to you, the Center City SIPs page with the different information about the vendors. So they do provide a list view of all the different vendors, not just as a grid, but as a list. And let's go back. And so we'll be focusing on extracting and scraping the data from these tables that are provided for us. Okay, and then if I switch back to the HTML file generated by the Quarto document, that's what's open on my screen right now. And so it looks like a standard web page. There's a table of contents on the right-hand side that'll help you navigate, but this will be the content that we'll go through today. Okay, let me go back to my slides. All right, so we'll start off with scraping the data using RVest. So the first step is to check site permissions. This was something I learned at a different R-Ladies workshop actually about this robots txt package. And we use it to just check the site's terms of service. Not all websites allow bots or scrapers to access the information for a variety of reasons. And so the robots txt package helps us check for this. And so in our case, what we're interested in is in the output, there's a section here that'll indicate allow or I think not allowed. So maybe what will show up if there's certain parts of the site that you're not allowed to scrape. But in our case, everything is allowed. And so then I feel comfortable moving forward. Into harvesting the data or scraping the data. So as I mentioned, we'll use the RVest package to do this. And we'll be scraping the information from each web page. So the list that I showed earlier, which I have on my screen now again, there's 3 different pages or 4 different pages, maybe, yeah. And so we'll go through, I think the 4th one. Oh, interesting. I think some more were added after I went through this process the first time. Okay, cool. So we'll go through and scrape the different pages from the site. And so the first part, and you can go ahead and follow along with me. I'll talk through the way that back up a little bit. The way that I'm envisioning this going is I have these slides that are here to provide a little bit more context as to the decision-making process that went into this project, but then I'll also be following along and in the RStudio Cloud project and clicking through and running the different code chunks so we can do that together. Okay, but to start off, we are defining the page. So the base page, the first page, excuse me, that we want to scrape, that first page of information. We'll define that, and then we'll use this read HTML function from RVest to scrape the information from that particular web page. And there's a lot of information within that web page, right? Not just the information that we want, so that table of information, but there's a lot of other stuff going on. And so we have to extract specific things, and we have to use the RVest package to identify the different pieces of the page that we're actually interested in. So we have to look for certain identifiers in the web page that we want to ask RVest to focus on and pull information from. So the first piece that I'll highlight here in the chunk where we are defining table 1, which is the table from the first page, is this HTML node and HTML table. And so if I go back to the page on the website, the first page where the information is listed, if I'm approaching this and I want to scrape information off of a web page, I will inspect the web page. So I can either right click on the page and go down to inspect, or you can use Command Option, or I think Control Alt I to pull up the pane in your browser. And then there should be an option to pick an element on the website and then find hidden HTML information about it. And so in this case, because my screen because the whole table doesn't fit in my screen, I'm just going to downsize it a little bit so we can just confirm that it is that same table that we're looking at. And I'll try to see what it is that defines that table. And so I'm just hovering over different pieces of this page, and I want to find something that encapsulates that whole table. And so I found a block that has information about it, but there's other components within that large block. And so I'm going to navigate down the HTML in the inspector to try to find the table, which is what we're interested in. Okay, so here there's a section of the web page that's now highlighted. It's a div, and that seems to encapsulate the table information. And then sure enough, there's this table aspect here in the HTML that we can use with that RVest, those RVest functions. And so that's what's specified here, is the table was easily identified in the HTML, and because it's such a common process, I think there's already a built-in function in RVest for tables that makes it really easy for us. And so that's what's happening in that section. And then there's, on the slide, we can see now that there's a small table that shows up with just 3 of the entries from the data that we scraped. And so there's name, address, phone, and then CCD SIPs specials, which is referring to a link that is present in the table. And if one were to click on this link, then another little pop-up opens up for that particular restaurant that shows what the restaurant is, information about the restaurant, and then information about the specials if they have them posted. Okay, what we don't have though in this particular data frame that we're looking at is information about that link. We only were able to capture the fact that there is text there, but not the links to the specials. And I think that's something that could be useful to include in the map. And so I want to also scrape that from the web page. So the following tab, links to specials, takes care of that step for us. So what we do here is, again, we have the HTML1 object that we've created. And so from that, we're going to extract specific things, just like we extracted information about the table. Now we want to go through and extract information about those hyperlinks with the information about the specials. And so there's other functions in RVest that can help with these other things. And so one of them is called HTML_elements. And for this one, I ended up going through the same process that I demoed a little bit ago, which is using the inspector in the browser to find information about the data that I want to scrape. And so if I hover over one of those links to the specials, in the HTML, it shows me that there's a class that corresponds, a CSS class that corresponds specifically to those links. And that all of the links would be sharing that same class. And so that's something that's specific enough that we could ask RVest to look for. And so that's indicated on line 4. And then we follow that up with a different RVest function that specifies href, which is the specific link aspect of the data that we just scraped. And so if I click again on one of these examples and the pop-up window shows up, there's nothing in the main URL that indicates that there's been a change, because this window, I learned, I think it's called a modal window. And so it's not quite the same as if you were navigating to a link that opened up in a new page. But that aside, if we hover over one of these link specials, we can see on the bottom right, just by hovering over it, we'll get more information about that specific URL. And so essentially what it is the main URL that we scraped, which, is centercityphila.org, et cetera, and ends in page =1. And then there's a pound sign or a hash mark, and then the specific, the specific link portion that corresponds to that particular restaurant specials. And so that's what we're able to scrape by identifying the links through the class, the CSS class, and by extracting that link portion as well. And so in the output, we can see a small little data frame, and we are just showing 3 entries, but we can see that we were able to scrape those shorter little links from each of the items. And then to create full hyperlinks, we'll want to paste those onto the full link that we have for the web page, so that if somebody were to click on it, it would take them to the little specials window, and so they can get more information.
Sylvia, can I jump in with 2 quick questions?
Mm-hmm.
So one, I don't know if you're familiar with the Polite package, but do you know if there's any benefit to using the Robos text package versus the Polite package?
I have heard of a Polite package, and I can't remember if there's a specific. I know the Polite package, there's other functionality to it, and I remember that when I learned about it in this other Our Ladies meetup, the person teaching the workshop was using both of them, was using the robots.txt package and Polite, so for different purposes. I don't know if there's a robots.txt function already built into Polite. I'm not sure, but that's a great question. It'd be good to look into.
Okay, thank you. And then one other one that we have unanswered, is there any browser inspector that you find better for finding what elements to scrape? It looks like you're using Firefox. I think somebody said here that they have only used Chrome before.
Yeah, I think all browsers will have pretty similar inspectors. What I could recommend is, I don't have specific names offhand, but I know there are different browser extensions that are named something like CSS Selector or CSS Viewer that help you when you click on that extension and then hover over the page, it'll be a lot more straightforward to identify what CSS class, for example, is controlling the styling of a particular element on the web page. So I can't recommend a specific browser, but I could recommend looking into browser extensions that might have more useful tools.
We'll post some links in the chat and put some people on it. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Okay, and so in order to create the full hyperlinks, we are just going to paste together our table 1, so our table from the first page that we scraped a few steps back. We're going to paste that together with the information from this, together with the information about the links that we scraped in our last step. And specifically to get the full link, we'll have to, of course, paste the URL that we scraped with the short little hyperlink. I don't know what that's called, the little hyperlink portion. And so the result is this this data set, this little data frame that is showing on the slide right now, that contains the name, the address, phone number, which we don't really need, but is there anyway. And then the specials is a column that contains the full link for each of the restaurants, specials at each of the restaurants. Okay, I'm gonna hop over to RStudio Cloud and just catch up with y'all. Okay, let me go ahead and load packages. I'm gonna go ahead and check permissions with robots.txt. And I've gotten to the code chunk where we scrape the information off of page 1. There's my data frame. And then we'll keep moving down to the next section. Okay, so the next section talks about harvesting data from the remaining pages. And so this was something that I learned from others as well, is that because it takes a little bit of trial and error sometimes to figure out what it is that what attributes or what class IDs or what have you need to tell RVest to look for. You want to practice that on something small and just scrape one page to start. And when you get the result that you're looking for, then go ahead and write a function that'll help you scrape the rest of the pages. And so that's why it's split up this way in this workshop and in the tutorials, because I've learned that that's just good practice and helps you save some time as well. Okay, so we're ready now to jump over to harvesting data from the remaining pages. And as I said, there's a function that is written in the materials that'll help us do this. And so I define the function first, and the variable that I'm using in the function is the number of pages available with data on them. Because if you recall, we have a URL that ends in something like page equals, and we had been using page equals 1 for that first page, but now we want to do page equals 2, 3, and 4. And so that's what we want to iterate our function over, is the remainder of those pages. So I have a section here in the function that waits for 2 seconds between each scrape. I've learned that that's a polite practice, and I think this is something that the polite package can help you handle and consider too, if I'm recalling correctly. The next section, lines 6 through 9, has the URL, and again, it ends in page equals, and then we're defining that page number variable, or including that page number variable in there. And then again, we're following the same steps that we followed for page 1, only now we put it in the function. And so we're reading the HTML page, and then we're extracting information from the table, and then we're extracting the hyperlinks to the specific restaurant and bar specials. And then we're creating those full hyperlinks with the information that we have. And so scraping pages 2 through 4, I'm going to say, because we saw in the web page that some restaurants and bars got added after I completed this project. So luckily we can just change the 3 to 4 and then get that additional information, and it'll be, we'll be good to go. So to get the remaining tables, we apply I mean, you can use, there's different ways to do this, but I like to use the per package when possible. And so I used this map underscore df or data frame function that'll just spit out a nice data frame after it does the job that it needs to do with the function that you give it. And so our function that we defined earlier is get tables. So that's here. And then 2 through 3 is the range of pages that we want to go through. And I'm going to be changing that to 2 through 4 when I go through this with you. And then the next page would be to combine all the tables together that you're scraping from into one large table. And then here I do have a little shortcut because I included the scraped information as a data file in your data folder in case you wanted to skip that scraping process. But and you're welcome to do that. It just won't have all of the restaurants and bars in there because, as I said, I realized that there's some additional, there's an extra page, there's a 4th page that is not included in the data set that you have, but that I can go ahead and scrape in real time. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm switching back to RStudio Cloud. I'm going back to the code chunk that defines my function. I've run that. And then I am going to run the function, use the function, and I'm changing, in my RStudio Cloud session, I'm changing instead of going from 2 to 3, pages 2 to 3, I'm going from pages 2 through 4. And so I'm going to go ahead and run that code chunk, and that'll give me a new table that has all of the scraped information from all 4 pages. If I want to take a look, I can. There's my table. And then I have a recommendation here, and code is included for you to save your scraped data somewhere so that you don't have to re-scrape the information from the web page. Always good practice. And we can move on now to geocoding. So now that we have this data frame that has a bunch of addresses and restaurant names and links to the specials, but specifically, I'm thinking through the address. Now that we have the address, we can convert those addresses to geographical coordinates so that we can map them. And we can use the tidy geocoder package for that. In my written tutorial that I wrote up a few months ago, when I started this project, I used ggmap, and I wasn't familiar with tidy geocoder at the time, but in putting together materials for this workshop, I was sort of realizing how useful tidy geocoder is, and so that's why I'm showing it to you today, because it makes it super easy for you to use different geocoding services if you want to. So yeah, so let's get into it. So as I mentioned, we'll use a tidy geocoder package, and the goal is to convert the addresses that we have to geographical coordinates. And in this case, we're going to also specify that we want to use the ArcGIS service in particular, and I'll talk a little bit about that choice a little bit later. So in this code chunk that is responsible for geocoding the addresses, we're creating a new data frame called specials, and we're going to take that data frame that we just created from all the scraped information, that's called table, and we're going to feed that into the geocode function of tidy geocoder. And we're specifying which column contains the addresses. So in our case, that's the column called address with a capital A. And then we specify the method. As I said, tidy geocoder makes it easy for you to use different geocoding methods and services. We're specifying here we want to use ArcGIS. And then we specify, if we want to, this is optional, but what we want are latitude and longitude columns to be named at the end of this process. And so rather than having the default names of, I think, just lat long, I wanted to define them and name them as longitude and latitude. And so that's what I did. And so after running that little code chunk, we have latitude and longitude for each of our different addresses, which is awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on my RStudio Cloud session also, so I can keep up with everyone. Running the code chunk that geocodes the addresses. And it'll take just a little bit of time to run. And so it's passing, I get a little notification in the R console that says passing 64 addresses to the ArcGIS single address geocoder. So when I first did this months ago, I remember there being 59 addresses. And so they've added obviously another 5 since I first wrote that blog post. Okay, so we're done geocoding. Now we have a specials data frame that we can look at. And there it is. It's got the addresses along with the latitude and longitude coordinates for each of them. And then again, I recommend saving the data frame, the object that you just created somewhere so that you don't have to repeat this process. And with a small data set like we have, which was just, what, 64 different entries, it's maybe not that big of a deal because it didn't actually take us very long to do it. But if you have a lot more addresses, that starts to make a difference. And if you do use some kind of paid geocoding service, then you definitely don't want to geocode things more than once. Like, you want to be able to do it and then save your data and then just be able to use the data later that's already geocoded, so you don't have to repeat that process. Okay, and let me see if I have any additional information here. Oh, I remember I have another slide. Okay, so I selected ArcGIS as the method for geocoding because I noticed some variation between different services. Initially, I wanted to use Nominatum, which is an open source geocoding service from OpenStreetMaps. And but what I noticed is that it didn't match all of the addresses to latitude and longitude coordinates. And so then I tried different methods until I got one where all the addresses were matched to specific latitude and longitude coordinates. And so this table on this slide just has a quick little summary of what I had found, which was that among the ones that I tried, which were 3 services that didn't require an API key, and then Google, which does require an API key, but I already had it. Those are the 4 that I compared. And so ArcGIS, took about 22 seconds to run, and there were 0 addresses that were unmatched. So all of them got matched to coordinates. And then Nominatum matched most of them, but there are 4 that weren't. And then there's a census geocoding service, and that one also missed a couple. And then Google also matched all of the addresses to coordinates. And it was the fastest service, but it has limitations. Okay, so specifically, Nominatum couldn't identify coordinates for these 4 addresses. So Bud and Maryland's, Con Murphy's Irish Pub, Independence Beer Garden, and Ubon. And then interestingly, the census service didn't identify 2 of them, but they're not the same 2 as before. So Nominatum didn't identify Con Murphy's Irish Pub, and that was also true for census. But the census service didn't identify City Tap House, Logan Square, but then Nominatum did identify that one. That was not one of the missing ones. So all this to say that you might want to try different geocoding services for your projects and see which one you get better results from. Something else that I'm wondering if it could have made a difference is if it was separated, if the address was separated into street, state or province, and then, or city, state or province, and then some kind of postal code. I don't know if that would have, if having the information parsed out a little bit better, if that makes any kind of difference. I'm just not as familiar with how these geocoding services work on the back end. But I'm sure there are different ways to approach this kind of problem. Okay, and I think we can stop there for a break since we're wrapping up. We've just wrapped up the geocoding.
We do have 2 more questions in the chat real quick. One,
Great,
is it
perfect.
possible to link a FIPS code to these addresses through Tidy Geocoder?
I think so. I think I haven't tried it myself, but I'm almost certain that I read somewhere while I was getting familiar with the package that that there's an option where you would indicate that you want to include that as a variable, and it'll do that for you if you use obviously the census geocoding service.
Cool. What are some of the limitations of using Google for geocoding?
Okay, Google, I think the main limitation is that it's not free for however many entries you want to use. Like they have limits on what their free tier is. And so last I checked, earlier this summer, it was something like every free tier gets like $200 to spend on using different API services. And so you kind of eat away at that every time you use some kind of API service for a project. I don't really have a sense for how many addresses, for example, would use up all that money per month. I think it's maybe 200, for $10 a month or something. I'm not sure how many addresses that would be, but that's one of the limitations that I would highlight for sure.
Yeah, it's a pretty big one. And there's one other question that we got that I know there's been some chats back and forth, but any recommendations for tools or workshops to go over the basics of web scraping?
Ooh, yeah, I can recommend a couple of workshops that I'm pretty sure have recorded videos, much like this one's being recorded, other meetups. So I can dig those up and link them in the resource document that you all have access to later. And then tutorials on web scraping. I probably have some bookmarked. So yeah, I can definitely provide some resources.
Sweet. You think it's a good time for a 5-minute break? All right, let's do it. Everyone, we're going to come back in 5 minutes, get a drink, take a break, and then we will start back up in a few.
Great.
All right, 5-minute break is over. Sylvia, I'm going to hand it back to you to get into the map making part. I'm pretty excited about this part.
Great, me too. Okay, let me, sorry, just getting back into coming out of my break. Share screen. Okay, here we go. Desktop. Okay, we should have the slides up again. Can someone confirm, please?
Yep, we see your slides.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the last section of the workshop is all about building the map. And as I said before, we're going to use the leaflet package, which lets you build interactive maps that are very customizable and that are mobile friendly. So let's get into it. Well, this is exactly what I just said. So we're going to build this map, and leaflet is great. I'm a big fan. And in the code that you have as part of your materials, I included a little code chunk there in a CSS tip. If you're not somebody who wants to write CSS separately and then in a separate file and then find a way to import it, etc., you can include little CSS code chunks in your R Markdown or Quarto document, and it's basically like importing CSS into your document or injecting your document with that CSS. And so this little tip says, or provides an option for adding a Google font. In my case, I like using Red Hat text. And so I included a little code chunk with CSS code that imports that from Google Fonts so that I can use it in the map. Okay, so the very first step is to just plot these restaurants and bars. Like we have the addresses and now we have the latitude and longitude. And so now we can plot them on a map, which is super exciting. And so the first section of this code chunk is it uses a leaflet function, and you specify what your data set is. And then in this case, I also included some options and there's a tile options function to go along with that. And I specified the minimum zoom and the maximum zoom. And I don't really know what 15 and 19 actually correspond to in real life, but I just played around with these numbers until I felt satisfied with the sort of the range of zooming for the map. Like, I didn't want folks to be able to accidentally zoom way outside of the relevant area. Like, I wanted to limit how far out somebody could zoom, and then how far in somebody could zoom as well. And so that's what lines 3 and 4 in that code chunk do. And then there's the way that we actually are adding the different observations is by, in our case, we add circles with the add circles function from Leaflet. And that's where we specify, okay, where are the latitude and longitude coordinates, and what do you want to show in a pop-up when you click or press on that point or that circle, and then what's the label that you want associated with that circle. And so in our case, we specify that we want to use the latitude column in our specials data frame for latitude, of course, and then longitude column for longitude or for LNG. And for pop-up, I specified that I wanted the address to show up in a pop-up when somebody interacted with one of those circles. And then I wanted the restaurant or bar name to show up as the label for that circle. And so right off the bat, somebody could identify which circle or what restaurant or bar that circle corresponded to on a map. And then once they interacted with it, the pop-up would then have the address. And then I did include a little bit of customization in this code chunk to specify that I wanted to use the Red Hat text font family as like the default font for the map. And I specified the font size as well. And you definitely don't have to do this, it's completely optional, but that's what I decided to do. And I'm able to use Red Hat text in my map because I imported that little bit of CSS in that code chunk. So I've now on the slide, I'm showing the output of that code chunk on the right-hand side. And we can see a bunch of little kind of bluish or purple circles scattered around on a plain gray background. And so we can't contextualize these points in any way. Like they exist on a map somewhere, but we don't really know, what are these points? We have no sense for what these points are just by looking at this map. And so we need to do some extra things, including adding a map background. So we have our points plotted now, but we need some context to it. We need to add some kind of base map that gives us streets, some kind of layout of where we are with these points. And so in the code chunk, I've specified adding map tiles in the background using the add provider tiles function from Leaflet. And there's a selection of tiles that are available through Leaflet. I've selected one called cartodb.positron, which I think looks nice. And so if we go ahead and run that code chunk, we will see that there's, oh, my points aren't showing up. Interesting. Well, on my slides, the points aren't showing up. So let me go to RStudio Cloud and run it in there instead. Okay, let me catch up. We're going down.
I don't know if it's related, but we do have a question in the chat for why, in the add circles argument for the plot, the pop-up does not have a tilde, whereas the rest of the bars do.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I think we can try it and see what happens. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. So I think we should try it and find out. Okay, catching up. Let me plot the restaurants and bars. Okay, so I've got points on a gray background now. That was step number 1. So let's go ahead and try adding a tilde here and seeing what happens if we do that, if anything. Yeah, it seems to just plot, it seems to plot the same points. So I'm not sure. Maybe we can take tildes off somewhere else and still be able to plot them. Yeah, it seems like we don't need these tildes in here. I mean, what I'm sure those came from was from some example somewhere online. Object name not found. Interesting. Yeah, now I'm just sort of live troubleshooting what this issue is. Yeah, I guess what I was saying, sorry, what I was saying was that I'm sure positive that I copied the example and modified it for my project from somewhere else, whether it's Stack Overflow or some tutorial somewhere, and I'm sure they included tildes, but it doesn't seem like we need them. So if I take out the tildes and just use definitions like label equals specials, and then I specify name, so $name, and it seems to work just fine. But I'm glad you asked because I didn't know that. Now I know. Okay, now I'm on the step in my cloud project where I'm going to add the map background. And if you're following along, you'll see this, but you can also see it on my screen. There's a map now that has our points on it, but it also has some context. It has a base map that tells us where we are. So it tells us that we're in Philly, specifically in this sector of the city called Center City District, which is where this, event was taking place this summer. And so we can identify different streets that the different establishments are on. And because we specified that we wanted the name to be the label of the circle, when we hover over one of the circles, the name will show up on the screen. And then if we go ahead and click on one of those circles, then the pop-up comes up that includes the address that the address of that restaurant or that bar, which is what we specified in our code chunk when we said, what was it, pop-up, I think was the parameter. Yeah, okay. Let's get rid of this for now. I'll go back to my slides and see if I continue to have issues with my slides later. Okay, so the next code chunk talks about setting the map view. So we've added our map markers of the circles. We've added map tiles in the background. The next step adds or sets the map view. And you can set the map view, I think, a lot of different ways. You can probably just choose, latitude and longitude coordinates that make sense for you. And in my case, and again, this is just something I had found in a tutorial, somebody took the mean, the average of all the longitude coordinates in their data set and latitude, and then set their map view to that average. And so that's what I've done here. And then I specified the zoom as well. So the zoom in this case is 16. Again, I'm not sure what those numbers correspond to in real life, but that's a number that you can play with so that you can get the map to look how you want. Okay, and again, they're not showing up on my slides, but that's okay. I had to update something when I pushed changes and then they didn't go through. Okay, so in my RStudio Cloud project, again, I'll make this a little bit bigger. I am scrolling down to the next code chunk about setting the map view. And if I run that code chunk, I get a map that's maybe slightly moved by just with the default view when it's rendered than before, because now we've specified that we want to start off looking at this map in some kind of spot in between all the different restaurants and bars that we've plotted.
Silvia, it does seem like it's showing up on the slides for some folks, so it might be just like a version control issue.
Interesting.
We do have one more question. Does the order of add circles, add provider tiles, and set view matter in this case? Like I know it does for ggplot.
It matters. Some of them matter. I think mostly they don't matter. You can sort of interchange them. But if you want to plot your data points, you do have to specify where those points live in your data frame and how it is you want to sort of anchor your map is by these geographical coordinates. And so the section about adding map markers is important to do early on, because those points are what anchor you somewhere in the world. If you don't have them there, actually, I'm pretty sure I tried this and I can't remember exactly what the outcome was, but we can test it if we have some time. I tried adding the map tiles first and then adding the map markers, and the map tiles, I think they, Leaflet wasn't sure where to put them because we hadn't specified, or where to put the base map because we hadn't specified where we are in the world yet. So having those anchor points, I think, definitely matters at the beginning. But I think the other pieces of customizing can sort of flop around in different places depending on what you want to write. I mean, in this case for the workshop, I did try to layer them in a way that for educational purposes was making sense. But I think they could have gone in any order after I added those map markers.
Thank you.
Okay, and another piece here, which I really like, is adding the ability for a user who's interacting with this map to enter full screen mode. Yeah, especially because the way that I had shared this with the world was in a blog post, and so because it was in a blog post, it was kind of contained within the formatting of my web page on my blog, and it was a little bit small. I wanted people to be able to use full screen mode and then look at the map in its entirety. And there's a package called leaflet.extras, which allows you to do this and also add other functionality that I haven't even explored yet. But that's the new section of this new code chunk that we're running, is adding that ability to have a full screen button. And the function from leaflet extras is add full screen control, and that's empty. Maybe that's, I wonder if you could specify something within the parentheses for add full screen control, but I'm not sure. I don't remember from the documentation. And so if we do that, we can see that there's on the map, on the right-hand side, I'm looking now at the output, which on my end does not show points like my markers for some reason, but I understand for some of you it does. On the left-hand side, top left corner of the map, in addition to there being a plus and minus sign, which were there by default and were there to zoom in or zoom out of the map, now there's an extra button underneath that looks like a little square. And if we click on that button, oh, they're my markers again. If we click on that button, then we can enter the map in full screen view. And I can see on my end my markers, my map, the way that I'm supposed to be able to see them, not the way I was seeing them on my slide. Oh, but here they are again. So yeah, I'm not sure what's going on there, but I'm glad they're showing up. Okay, let me go back to my Studio Cloud project and catch up. I'm scrolling down to the next section, which is about adding full screen control, and ran that code chunk. And so I see that the result of that code chunk is that now the map has the full screen button on the top left corner as well. Okay, now we want to customize our map. I mentioned that Leaflet lets you customize a lot of things. I wanted to customize the map, just choose different colors for the map markers, make them look a little bit different, change the text, and so, or the color and the font style and everything. And so there may be a better way to do this that I haven't discovered, but what I found online when I created this map was that people create first like a little information about how they want to style or what they want to include in their pop-up circles, for example, in the circles that have pop-ups. And they'll kind of paste together a bunch of, like a combination of HTML and CSS, like raw HTML, really, but that also includes references to your data set and information in your data set. And so in this code chunk, we want to customize the markers for each of the restaurants and bars. And what I wanted to do was, so currently the map that we have, I'll just remind us all, if we hover over it, we can see the name of the restaurant and bar. And if we interact with the circle or click on it or press it, the pop-up shows the plain address. And I wanted there to be more information in that pop-up for folks. And specifically, I wanted to be able to, link out to information that's provided on the website for this event, specifically those very particular links to the specials that each restaurant or bar was offering, which is why we went through the trouble of scraping that additional information before, is so that we can add it to our map now and just provide more information to the person using it. And this information is what's being coded in this pop info circles object. And so the first section that I'm highlighting on my slides now is to create a level 2 heading. That's the H2. And I'm styling it a particular way. I'm choosing red hat text. I'm using a certain font size and a certain color. And then the next step that's being pasted together with the last one is an anchor. So an A, I think A stands for anchor, which is essentially a link. So I want to also include a link that I've styled a certain way, specified a color, specified, actually, I think that might've been the only thing I specified for the link. But most importantly is I wanted to create that link for the specials, or use the link for the specials rather. And so I specify here that I want to paste href to whatever link it is in our data set, the specific specials link. I wanted to link that in, and so I can refer to that specials column in our specials data set. And I also want to include the name of the restaurant or bar. So this line that's highlighted, line number 4, is creating a link where the text it shows is specials name, or excuse me, is the name of the bar or restaurant. In our data set, it's the name column from our specials data frame. And encoded in, or a hyperlink to that name, is the link to the specific specials. And then I also wanted to add another little piece to the pop-up box that had information about the address. So I still want to include the address in there, so that if somebody wanted to use this map, they could, they would just have the address and be able to identify exactly what establishment they're arriving at. And so I have a little paragraph section, so designated by P in the HTML, which is styled a certain way, but most importantly has a reference to the address column in our specials data frame. So this is all, this code chunk is all just about indicating what you want to show up in the pop-up, but in this case, it's how you want it to show up. So whether it's as a level 2 heading, or as a link, or just as regular paragraph text, that's what these different pieces are doing for us. And it might be a little bit easier to understand if you've looked at HTML and are a little bit more familiar with it, then this formatting of the same information might make more sense, where if one were to look at this pop-up window that we're going to see when we look at our map later, if we were to look at that information and then inspect that web page, just like we were inspecting it for web scraping earlier, the HTML on the back end would look something like what I have on the slide right now, which is you would have our level 2 heading, you would have a style section that talks about, or that includes information about the font size, the color, and so on. And then within that level 2 heading, I would have that anchor, that link, and it would look something like what's on the slide here on lines 5 through 8, which is still a reference to the style that I want to apply to that. And then this is an example with one of the restaurants called Yamitsuki Sushi and Ramen. And so we can see in this example that there's the anchor piece of the HTML, and inside of it, there's the href, the actual link pointing to one of those specific specials links that we created in our data frame. And then the last piece I'm showing in this slide is the paragraph piece that we also talked about a little bit ago, which is regular text that I also wanted to show up with just the address. And so if we were to look at the raw HTML on the back end, it might look something like what I have on lines 12 through 15, where there's the paragraph indicator, the beginning and the end, and then information in between. And so this address that's shown here corresponds to Yamitsuki Sushi and Ramen. And it's again styled a certain kind of way with a certain font face, a certain font weight, font size, and so on. Okay, so now let's just actually apply this information to the map. And so there's a little section that I've added to the map, or the map markers section of our leaflet code, which customizes the pop-ups. So before, our pop-up used to equal specials, $, address, but now pop-up is pointing to pop info circles, which is the information that we coded prior in this pop info circles code chunk. And so if I generate the map on the right-hand side, which is what I have showing on the screen, there's a lot of different things happening here. So it looks different than our last map that we made. This one has different color circles. Oh, I forgot to highlight that in the slide. Let's talk first about those pop-ups. So let's check the pop-ups now that we've made some changes. So if I hover over a specific restaurant, in this case, Continental Midtown, and I click on it, now we have more information in that pop-up. There's that level 2 heading that I specified, and that's hyperlinked to a specific special. And then underneath in regular paragraph text is the address. And it's all styled with red hat text, and the link is styled with a specific color. And so if I click on the link in this pop-up for Continental Midtown, then it takes us to the web page for the event, the Center City SIPS event, but now it's showing us that pop-up window on that site that has information about the different specials that that restaurant or bar was offering. And so now if somebody's using the map, they can, if they want to, travel to the website to look at the specific specials associated with that location. Now, what I didn't highlight in my slide, which I meant to and then forgot, was that in addition to customizing those pop-ups with specific information, like we were just talking about, I also added some customization to the markers themselves, specifically the lines 8 through 12, add some more customization, and this is for the markers specifically. So if we go back to our old map, we can see that the map circles were kind of like a purple, bluish purple kind of color, and they have an outline that's maybe like a darker color, and there's some opacity to them. They're kind of transparent. Now, if I fast forward in my slides back to where we just were, our new markers look different. They're a different color. They're filled with a different color. They have an opacity to them now. And I eliminated the stroke or the outline from the circle. And so it's set to stroke equals F or false. And then I also specified the size of the marker. So I said radius equals 12. And these are all things that, of course, you can customize and play around with to get the markers looking the way that you like them to. Okay, so now that we've added markers and we have pop-ups that link to more information, the last piece that I wanted to add on and customize with is having some kind of special marker on the map that included information about what that map even is. Like if somebody were to open this map and they see a bunch of markers on there, that's cool, and that could be helpful, but only if you know what it is or what you're looking at. And so I wanted to create a new separate little pop-up that looked different from the markers that somebody could interact with, and then get a little bit more context about what those markers are. And so I decided to do that with information about Center City SIPs. I wanted to link it out to the main web page and then just specify that we were looking at a map in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And so to create that little custom marker, we follow marker with a custom pop-up. We follow a very similar process that we did when we were customizing the pop-ups for the markers, except in this case, it's called Pop Info Marker. And we're pasting together bits of HTML along with information from, or additional information that we want to put in there related to our data set or our project. And so on lines 3 and 6, which is where I highlighted on my slide right now, I'm specifying that I want this pop-up to have a level 1 heading, so it's a little bigger than the level 2 heading. And then I specify some styling. So I want some padding on the top. I want to add a margin on the top and bottom. And these are all things I kind of played with after I saw how it looked without any styling. Then I went through and added some little tweaks. Again, I specified the font family, and the font size is also something I played around with. And then I specified a color as well. And then I wanted that level 1 heading to link out to information about the event. And so I have to add another anchor to it. Just like last time, I have to hyperlink that information with something, and I want to include that in this HTML that I'm pasting together. And so I have the href here, which is very similar to what we saw a couple of slides ago. Only now, instead of it pointing to a column in our data set, we're pointing to the link. This is just one marker that we're adding in the center of our map. And we want that to point to the main Center City SIPs website. And so I just specified what that link is here, and then what text I want to be displayed for that link, which is Center City District SIPs 2022. And then the last piece is adding another little chunk of regular paragraph text to include information about where we are on the map, which in this case is Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And again, I styled it with a certain color, a certain font family, and so on. And then in terms of what I wanted the visual marker to be, I had mentioned earlier I wanted it to be different than the other markers so that it didn't look like another restaurant or bar. And that it could be like a visual indicator to people using the map, that they could interact with that and learn different information than the markers for restaurants or bars. And I chose to make what's called an awesome icon. So an icon that uses font awesome icons or icons from other places, which is included in the leaflet package. And so I used the make awesome icon function to do this. And I specified that this is, I wanted to name it center icon. So that's what I named it. And within the function make awesome icon, I specified what I want the icon to be. So I wanted it to be like a little map pin. And so there's an icon called map-pin that looks just like what I was looking for. And I specified the icon color, and I wanted to specify the marker color. Now what I found with the marker color, and I included a little comment here, is that it doesn't accept just any hex code for color. It's particular. There were some, it seems to accept sort of the standard HTML colors that are always available, I think, on all the browsers, which are named colors. And there's like a list of them. One can Google HTML colors and you can find a list of the built-in colors that are just available and that are named for people to use. And so one of them is dark blue. And so that's what I decided to use for the icon because I couldn't use a specific hex code. And then the last parameter there is library equals FA, which is specifying font awesome. There are other icon, there are other sets of icons or icon families that aren't font awesome that you could specify with the library parameter too. And I have linked on this slide to the specific documentation in Leaflet about awesome icon if you want to read more. Okay, so if we're moving on and we're looking at the code chunk that brings all this together, there's some new lines that add a marker at the center, and so we use the function add awesome markers to add our icon that was going to go in the middle. And so I specify that the icon needs to be the information that we just customized for center icon. It's called center icon. So that's what I'm pointing to on line 33. And then on lines 34 and 35, we specify the coordinates, like where we want that marker to be. And then we specify the label, which is what somebody would see if they hover over the marker. And in this case, I wanted it to say Center City District SIPs 2022. And then I wanted to style that label a little bit too, like we did earlier in our code chunk to generate the map, which is just to specify the red hat text font family and then a specific font size. So that's included on lines 37 through 41. And then to add the actual information about the pop-up, so the information that we want when somebody interacts or clicks on that marker is specified on lines 42 and 43. So the parameter is pop-up, and then you set that equal to the information that we specified when we customized what we want in the pop-up in the last slide. And then there's also a parameter called pop-up options, which lets you set probably a lot of different things, but in our case, we're setting the max width to, I think it's 250 pixels, because the first time around when I didn't specify, it looked fine. The pop-up looked like a good size, you know, like a readable size when I was exploring the map, but on a desktop, or I guess probably a laptop screen. And when I tried viewing the map on a phone, even though the map is mobile friendly because Leaflet has designed it to be, the pop-up themselves might not have been within view of my phone's screen, but I think it was like a little bit wider. And so I wanted it to be constricted to a width where no matter which device you were using, you could still see the whole pop-up on your screen. And so I played around with the numbers and it seemed like 250 was a good value there. Okay, and so if I look at the output on the right-hand side of the slide, now there is a very different marker right in the middle of our map that is a dark blue color with a map pin icon at the center. And it looks very different from the other markers. If I hover over it, it says Center City District SIPs 2022, because that's what we specified the label to be on line 36. And then if I click on it, then it brings up a pop-up window with the information that we specified in the last slide, which is I wanted it to read Center City District SIPs 2022, but also hyperlink to the main event page and then specify that we're in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And let me just follow along, catch up again in my RStudio Cloud session, just in case. Customizing map markers, customizing marker labels, adding a marker at the center, doing that customizing, and then finally adding that center marker. Okay, so that's the end of the map making process. And so that whole code chunk that starts around line 393 in your Quarto document has all the different pieces layered on that we've talked about throughout this section of the workshop. And they're all commented. And yeah, just to specify what's what and what it was that we talked about. And so this event, just to give you a sense for whether people used it, the event was officially running from June 1st of this year to August 31st of this year. And I think I shared the map right on June 1st. And so in that time period, and just visitors from the US, I try to narrow it down to people that would be visiting that blog post for that it was relevant to them, that they might have been looking for this information. The point is that during those months, I received this particular blog post with the map received almost 3,200 views from 2,300 US visitors, and which is kind of amazing. I mean, it really blows my mind that many people interacted with this map, whether it was actually to go find information about happy hour specials happening in Philadelphia, I don't know, but it is kind of amazing that it did get a little bit of traction. And just to provide a little context for this dashboard that we're looking at on this screen, this is generated by a tool called Umami, which is a privacy-friendly analytics tool that provides, or that captures very, very broad analytics for a website. And I recommend you check it out if you're interested. So that's all I have for today. I just want to say thanks to everybody who is here and who spent this time with me on this map making adventure. I'm really happy to be here and share this with you, and then yeah, answer questions or chat about things, or maybe even hear ideas about other things you could use these skills for. I think it's pretty cool that we have all these art tools at our disposal that help us gather information, like gather data that isn't readily available for us through scraping, and then being able to produce something with it. I'm very excited about all the different things that you can do with RVest and with a lot of different mapping packages. So I'll stop here.
Sylvia, this was awesome. Thank you so much. We do have one more question. Is Umami free and easy to use? Do you know?
Umami is free. It's an open source tool. It's not super straightforward to set up. No. I think they are in the process of streamlining it and creating like a online cloud kind of setup where you can maybe pay a subscription and then have easy access to some kind of cloud dashboard. But I had to set it up myself at the time, and it was not as straightforward as I would have liked it to be.
Awesome. Thank you. This has been really good. We have so many comments in the chat, and both, I think, like people providing some different resources. You've shared quite a few. So I think we're going to have to like put all of these tools and resources into some sort of shareable document, because this was a really, really informative workshop. So thank you so much, Sylvia. If anybody does not already follow Sylvia on Twitter, check her out, go follow her. She posts a lot of really useful tutorials and information. So highly recommend giving her a quick follow if you don't do so already.
Yeah,
thank you.
And the Our Lady's Philly account.
Yes. Hopefully everyone is following that by now, if you aren't already. I think those are all of the questions. So I did just want to say thank you, and thanks to everybody as well in the chat for participating and having so many questions and comments. It's always really great when people get involved.